Steve Pleich, and welcome to this edition of Voices from the Village. Really pleased this evening to have, for a great conversation, my good friends Ann Simonton, Ann of Media Watch, nationally known organization changing the attitudes about racism, sexism, and the like. We'll talk about that a little bit if we can. Sure. And Tim Fitzmaurice. Tim, welcome. Council member 1998 to 06, mayor 2000-2001.
Right.
So you're certainly a veteran public servant. You're on many commissions, things like that, right. And now a replacement candidate during the recall. So I wanted to ask you both, kind of as a start, with the recall, which is now going to be determined on coming Tuesday, as that as a backdrop. How do you see the communities being affected by this, and what's been your perspective as people who've worked in the community for a long time to build community? And we see in a lot of instances now this seems to be dividing our community on any number of levels. Ann, do you want to?
I think it's been devastating to our community, and I've seen it, it's tearing apart friendships and relationships and all kinds of things. I think that the biggest problem, as I see it, is that we are all being led astray by a financial entity that is now going as far as, I've been playing Scrabble, you play on your phone, mm-hmm. and Words with Friends, and my friend is getting these yes on recall ads on that. I mean, to think of the money that they're spending is extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And to think that the idea is then to just do character assassinations against two mm-hmm. Candidates who won fair and square, and I know that they started the recall as soon as they were voted in because they could see, hey, progressive candidates could actually change policy, mm-hmm. and I think that it's been decades since we've had this. I think we need to have progressive voices have a chance to mm-hmm. have a say in a community that claims to be very progressive, but indeed hasn't been a voice for tenants or for homelessness. Mm-hmm. And I think those two things are things we really need to pull out. So that's I think what's really sad is that it comes also at a time where there's enormous national discord and enormous problems going on now with the coronavirus. Everybody's on edge. Right. Yeah. And so this just pushes it all mm-hmm. much farther into people's faces. And it's been very sad. We need a lot of nonviolent communication, don't we?
And Tim, it's great to have you here. Not only you were a council member, served on many commissions in the past, you were a lecturer at UCSC, a teacher in prisons, so certainly a Renaissance man in a lot of ways. But give us your perspective. You were on council turn of this century. You were mayor. What's the difference in terms of now you were a replacement candidate, so you're in a difficult situation, hoping that the recall does not succeed, right. And yet if it does, you would like to be the person who was elected to fill that seat. What's the difference in attitude and atmosphere? Oh, there you got your. Let's get you a microphone because we certainly would love to hear what you have to say.
Here, let me do it.
There we go. It's the beauty of live television, ladies and gentlemen. So we kind of do this as we can.
Is this working?
And Ann's going to work out as our technical director here.
You got it.
Right. So the difference really between serving on council and the temperament of council at that time, right. As opposed to what it's like today, and in the background of this kind of recall and divisiveness that we see.
The recall is it's an event that isn't truthful. It's not telling the truth about why it's mm-hmm. occurring. So what's happening is, in the past we've always had disagreements and even abusive situations in the city council. People have talked. Mm-hmm. They've behaved badly in the past. Right. Those kinds of things. So we've always had a problem with communication, and we always had to figure out ways to overcome those. But right now, there's something out there that's taking advantage of a weakness in the city right now. Mm-hmm. Of a vulnerability. That people are feeling vulnerable, and there's an economic interest that's coming in that's mm-hmm. going to take as much advantage of this situation mm-hmm. as possible. And I think the community needs to understand that whatever the feelings are around the recall is really just a dodge. It's meant to make way for for an oncoming rush, I think, mm-hmm. of investment, of development, of people changing the city so that it can become a more efficient city with respect to Silicon Valley or with respect to other interests that are outside of the community. And that's what it really interests me because I don't think people really realize where their own best interests are.
Right.
I was walking the circles today, and I see a community in the circles of really wonderful little houses on fairly large properties sometimes. And it's a funky little place. But we're about to see a development in the middle of in Errett Circle. I think we're going to see an onslaught of development in that area, just like on the east side, we're seeing the same thing.
Right.
People are interested in developing those areas, and they're not interested because they're trying to make the community, keep the community as a coherent kind of thing. They're trying to make it a much more efficient community for the people that want to take advantage of. We're in a sense being colonized by some outside interests that want to change the city and make it a resource for them.
Right.
And that's all over the map in terms of the people that are supporting this particular recall. So the recall is, I understand people have hurt feelings and all kinds of, issues that they'd like to figure out, but the fact is it's meant to be a dodge to keep us from paying attention to what's really happening in the community at this moment. So that's what I'm hoping we're going to get from this election is people to understand the threat that we're really under as a community from these outside interests.
Right, and of course we were talking about, there's about 37 or 38,000 registered voters in the city, and many of those have already voted. By mail.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of votes in the ballot box already, and more certainly to come, but there's been such intense interest. Part of what is being brooded about is that somehow this recall is going to kind of reset the board or end divisive politics in Santa Cruz. Frankly, I don't think that regardless of the outcome, you're going to end divisive politics in Santa Cruz till we all come to some kind of an accommodation about what our community values are and what our shared values are.
Right, and I mean that's ultimately what we want to do. And as you mentioned, outside interests, I think that some of those interests are actually in Santa Cruz, and a lot of the money for the recall actually are big builders and people who do property management that are here in Santa Cruz. So there's a lot of money in Santa Cruz that is willing to push this as well. And the connection between that and Measure M, because there was money that was left over from that campaign that was supposedly then used by Santa Cruz United, and that hasn't really come out because they were they didn't want to say that that was a connection. Right. But to spend nearly $200,000 so far that we know of, and then with all these ads they're doing on Facebook and so forth, it has got to be costing them quite a bit more. And that to me is not the way to do politics. Just as for me personally, I'm on the Commission for the Prevention of Violence Against Women, and that was, I mean, we were in the middle of the hornet's nest because if I were a political strategist, that was a perfect storm to be able to use that commission to make it seem as if these horrible characters had done sexual abuse and they had done these horrible things, and they were saying that up on campus. My housemate works up there for 15 years, and she overheard them saying, "Oh yes, sign this petition. These men have done horrible, terrible things to women." And I mean, illegal things, they said. And it's like, how did it get to that point? Right. They actually were excused of most of the problems, and workplace discrimination is supposed to be dealt with by HR in a very controlled environment. And as you say, there's always going to be political differences, and these issues come up all the time. Right. I mean, everybody needs to engage in mediation and has to be willing to do that.
I want to just throw in one other thing, though. We have our differences, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
I have this notion when I came into this of talking about what our friendship is when we're in a democracy. What's the nature of that? It's more like solidarity, union solidarity, where you're working for the same goals necessarily, but you're not the same people. And you don't necessarily bring all the same values to every discussion. Right. And we have to respect the differences that we find in those discussions. And so a lot of this is about understanding that the community is not necessarily going to always be getting along and in total agreement with everything, but that what we want to do is create a dialogue and come to agreements that are going to make the city, better, safer, more environmentally sound, and all of those kinds of things. And that's what I think people tend to forget. We don't necessarily have to be you know, close friends with everybody that's on the city council. And in fact, on the city council, you need to back off quite often and let the community has the voice and you got the vote.
Right.
You know, you're supposed to let people shout at you. You're supposed to let people bring their interests into the council chambers, and then you get the power of actually making a decision on the matter. So the council has to understand that's its job. Its job is not necessarily to wrangle with every member of the community.
And interestingly enough, oftentimes, and I go to council pretty regularly, and there are things that I will address at council that concern me at council, and even in the face of what purports to be on times a more progressive council, sometimes I don't feel like they're listening to me, or that they're hearing my side of the story, or they're agreeing with my policy. But that's just a disagreement about policy, about what we think is best for our community. But everybody, I believe, is sharing a value of wanting to make this a better community. For everybody here.
Well, I hope so.
And I'm not certain that a change of personnel is going to really enhance that. But it should be said that while we have a beautiful opportunity here for half an hour or so, and hopefully we'll have our good friend Teresa Coraggio call in, who has a unique perspective that I think we'd love to hear her share. Our studio audience should know that they can call in at 425-8848 extension 630 and ask our panelists a question. But more than that, and more importantly than that, is that this is live television, and when we finish our half an hour, our good friend Datta also will be here with some folks who are not sharing your view. And so our studio audience is just not listening to you and saying, well, they're only giving one side of the story. They're only telling one side of from there, because this is your perspective. This is what you believe. You'll be able to hear in this hour this evening both sides of this and make your own determination if you haven't gone to the polls already, when you go on Tuesday, and please do. Please weigh in on this very important issue. It's been so all-consuming that I think a lot of people want to get to the ballot box, want to cast their vote, and then let's see where we are on March 4th. What are your perceptions about where our community is going if there is a recall that's successful, or if it isn't? How do you think the quality of our life or the substance of our community will change with one or two or of the other of those outcomes?
Well, that's hard to say. And I hope that we don't have to have the recall.
Right.
I mean, of course, that's what I'm hoping for. But I also think that it's important for us to look at this issue not as something to do with about respecting women or protecting women, and that this is somehow that these women have been hurt and abused and intimidated and harassed, and that really that's why I think it's so important to see the bigger interests that have been pouring money into it to try to win it. That just wouldn't be the case.
And I think we have.
Good.
Hello, Teresa, are you with us?
I am.
Oh, yes. Wonderful. Well, fantastic. We're hoping that we'll be able to actually put a picture of you up on our screen so our viewers can see who we're talking to. But tell us a little bit about yourself, Teresa, and then tell us why you called in. We're really happy to hear from you.
All right. My perspective is about how Nextdoor has been used to promote the recall. But I also think that it's...
Okay. You can share that with us?
Right.
Tell her to turn her TV off. You turn your TV off. You were getting a...
I did.
Okay, great. Thank you. Go right ahead. So go ahead, please.
Yeah. So the perspective that I have is that I've been a lead on Nextdoor, and Nextdoor, I believe, has been instrumental in making it so that the recall could go through.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been possible without 400, just to my neighborhood alone, 400 different campaign messages to go and sign the petition, and that Nextdoor has created an environment where truth doesn't matter, so that anything that gets out can go to 12,000 people, and it doesn't matter whether it's factual or whether it's fabricated. So that's been a major way that I've found things have been turned from things that were political differences into personal attacks.
And of course, now our viewers should know that you're a longtime Santa Cruz resident, former worked in HR, have a lot of experience around town. So this is not somebody who happens to be calling in from far away, voicing an opinion about something that doesn't really affect her community, because you are, a longtime community member.
Yes, I've been in the community for 40 years.
Wow.
And as an HR director, watching what was happening within city council was really alarming to me, because I would never imagine that you would take a personnel issue and turn it into a public spectacle the way that happened with then Mayor Watkins. Having public accusations of gender-based discrimination and bullying being done from the podium, where she was controlling the narrative and not allowing any kind of rebuttal, was making that out of hearsay. That really has started this whole ball rolling in a way that diverted attention from the issues that first started it. So that's been a concern of mine, is that I feel that bullying is really about an abuse of power. And the power was really with the mayor at that point, who then used this to turn this into something that became an $18,000 investigation that didn't prove her allegations. And that's never been something that she's come back and retracted, even though the investigation never showed the things that she had publicly alleged.
Well, that's an interesting perspective, Teresa. Thanks for sharing that. I'm sure that our viewers and the people who haven't gone to the ballot box yet to cast their votes will appreciate being informed about that perspective. We appreciate you calling in and sharing that with us.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Your observations?
Well, I think another thing that she brought up that I think is really important for us to understand is that the recall effort started on November 29th, 2018 on Nextdoor, where they were posting things about the procedures for city recalls and trying to figure out if they wanted to recall 2 now, Sandra Brown and Chris Crone, and 2 later, Drew and Justin, or wait 90 days and knock them all down like bowling pins. I read that myself. I'm a member of Nextdoor, and I witnessed that. Mm-hmm. I witnessed Nextdoor being used as an incredible mouthpiece for pro-recall. And anyone that dissed it or said, that didn't happen, or I don't think that, they lost. They were taken off. They were literally censored on this social media platform, where people were, finding out about how to kill rats and have plants. Cuttings and things. That's what I used it for.
I don't think we really understand. Nextdoor was begun by 3 or 4 investment bankers as a nationwide kind of operation. Excuse me.
There
we go.
All right.
A little better.
Anyway, so Nextdoor, is a franchise that's employed by the community. The community, I think, a lot of people find value in it. They find value they can exchange furniture or whatever they can do, but it is being deployed to have these particular outcomes. And I think it's really darkened that particular scene. But it's already a 2-dimensional kind of connection in the community. It's not really a conjoined kind of community conjunction where people come together in community. And so that connection was already pretty impoverished, and now I think it has been directed toward this particular
right, because it's
effort.
not just in Santa Cruz. This has gone on. A very similar campaign went on to recall progressives in Chico and using Nextdoor. So again, I think it's important to look at the big picture, and that's what we're hoping people will be able to do before they vote on Tuesday.
And I think as a citizen, and I haven't cast my vote yet, but what's equally disturbing to me, and you can maybe comment on this as a co-founder or founder of Media Watch, is the underlying racism and sexism that exists. Now, this is not simply political or personal. There is quite substantial, I think, sexism involved. I think there's quite substantial racism involved, and we have to be aware of that. We have to understand that is something that's happening in our community and address that.
Exactly. I mean, what I see with this is an enormous amount of racism against Drew, because he is a large black man. and he was born and raised here, so he has the experience of having lived in a very white community that is, from my experience of the African American friends that I know, they have trouble renting, they have trouble driving while black, they're pulled over more often, there's an assumed guilt. And so this, he created, just because he is a large African American male, that he is already guilty in so many people's eyes. And so the idea that he has also, he's outspoken, he's passionate about his constituency, he has regular meetings with his constituents, which is not something that hardly any other council member does. Did you ever have regular meetings with your constituents?
Yeah, I had some meetings.
So you did, but I mean, you were an exception. That's not a normal thing to do.
That's
an
absolutely true.
exception.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Some
so,
people do.
Yeah.
but that means that you have passion for your job and for your appointment, which is to be a mouthpiece for the community, and to take the community's will and make that into policy. So this is it's been very disturbing to see what has happened on the commission, because they were using terminology that had to do with survivors of rape and violence and extreme harm done to them, like this whole idea of start by believing. And that slogan was used over and over again, and that they've been intimidating, and he was bullying and all these different things of to me that were really uncalled for. And so I think one thing that I'm hoping that will change as a result of all this is that we will all take stock in how we are being manipulated, because it's happening certainly on the global, on the national thing for the November election, where we've already seen how Cambridge Analytica memes are coming in and being bought up by, Zuckerberg's already selling things to Trump for how to win the next election. And so hopefully we need to learn through media literacy is why it's so important.
And that is a problem, again, in my view. A lot of what people who are the mainstream voters and residents of Santa Cruz see is what they read in the Sentinel, they read someplace as well. There's this divisiveness on council. There's a dysfunctionality of council. They're not doing the people's work. They're arguing amongst one another, and that's all they see. And as Tim points out, all previous councils have had disagreements about policy and things like that. So this is not necessarily unusual, but it's been elevated to the point where this is something we need to address, and we need to address it by throwing these people out and different people in, but that's all that we know. But they don't know the depth of the story, and that's what I'm hoping we're able to explain to our studio audience here, and not only in this half hour, but in the half hour that will follow with Datta and some other folks.
Yeah, I'm concerned that Renee Golder has said that she has never been to a city council meeting before. And this, I think, is a kind of an ignorance that is dangerous to be put onto a city council without ever having that experience. I think it's important to participate, to be a participating citizen, to go and speak to the council and see what that's like, and see how people get angry in there and that they are upset because we have challenges as a small community, just like every culture is having challenges. And I think that with the homelessness and the problems with mental illness and that killing of that kid that happened, that was the last time. I've been to speak a few times, but I was very upset about that. Kid being shot within 20 seconds of the arrival of the police officers. This is extraordinary. And this kind of thing, we can't let these kinds of things happen, I don't think. And so, that's why. Well,
Tim can speak to, there's a substantial learning curve, I'm sure, when you're elected, you get onto council for the first time.
Yeah, I made my mistakes. It takes time to come to grips with being on the council. That's why I think it's great that Catherine's running, and
Catherine Byers. I hope
people that are experienced. That's a really telling that Chris is being recalled. And he'll be removed from office for 7 months or 8 months, given the fact they also have a holiday, an August holiday during that period. So it really tells you something about the substance of that particular recall, that they just wanted him removed because they had to manipulate the situation in certain ways. And then people, I think, as I go door to door, people are seeing the pile of glossy mailings that are coming in that basically show these, this really dark view, dark view of these particular characters, and all of that.
And
You
it
just
should-
know there's just a ton of money behind this. And I really can't get past the fact that this is a distraction. That people need to understand that our community is at risk. We're at a turning point. This is a really important election. I think the fall election, likewise, is a really important election in terms of who's going to be shaping this community. Are the economics of another community going to shape us, or are we going to shape the economics of our community? Who's going to be in charge of making this community what it is? And I honestly believe people are looking at this with a great deal of their own interests at heart. And I don't mind that. You know, if I'm on the council and people want to bring, you know, anybody wants to bring in their particular goals, they want to bring them to the council, that's fine. But we have to make policy that reflects the needs of the community, that can hold this community together. And that's what I'm afraid. The community is going to be split apart. It's going to be split apart. This is not going to be healed easily if this recall goes through. It won't be healed if I'm elected or if Catherine's elected. That's not going to be a simple process. We're going to have to do a process where people in this community are going to have to start to trust each other again and trust the council again and those kinds of things. And this council, that's been shattered. Certain political relationships have been shattered by this. And I don't think people have taken full stock on exactly where we are now after all that.
And we got about a minute left. It's going very, very quickly. And thank you for being here. Thank you both for being here. Just a few words as we go out.
Well, it's International Women's Month, and so I'm encouraging people to go to the library. We have a display at the downtown library, and there'll be an event with the UNA coming up.
Well, Ann Simonton, founder of Media Watch, thank you for being here and for all of your great work in the community, all of your positive things that you continue to do for the community. And Tim, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Steve.
It's a delight to have you. And again, mixed feelings about the best of luck on Tuesday, the best of outcomes.
There are no winners in this election.
Yeah.
I just don't feel there's a winner in this election. It's going to take time to figure out how this community is going to get back together.
To heal.
Well said. Thank you so much. And thank you, Teresa Caravaggio, for calling in. And her perspective again, Ann and Tim, thanks so much for being here. I've been Steve Pleich. And thank you for tuning in, and really stay tuned for our second half an hour of Voice from the Village, where you'll be seeing Datta Khals interview a couple other folks, and we'll give you some more information about the recall in Santa Cruz. So see you next time. Bye.
Voices from the Village installment on the recall. I have joining us for this installment Fred Antaki is a local fellow real estate professional active on the Board of Realtors Local Government Relations Committee, and Darius Mohsenin, who's a longtime local citizen and business owner. Thank you both for joining us. So we've heard some strong opinions voiced for how it shouldn't be about the conduct, but more about the issues, and some feeling that there are bigger financial interests that are at the root of this. What are your thoughts on that? I guess, Fred, we'll start with you.
As far as what are the core issues here, I think the core issues to me are whether or not we can get a functional city council, whether the issues can get, we're trying to get a place where there's not extreme points of view, because I think extreme politics cause extreme reactions. I think that's what we saw with Measure M. There was a fight, and then the vote came down 2-1 against it. And there's a reason for that. It wasn't because it was just money. That's what I think is a mischaracterization of what happened. It's just rich people coming from the outside. It was the middle class people, the mom and pops, the people that actually, do provide the housing, said this is bad policy. And I think a lot of people that had owned property, who weren't necessarily even landlords, agreed with that, because they had to. 2-1 is a big majority. And so the council got elected by, I'd say, very small amount of vote. We won't get into the process of how that happened, but at UC, trying to get people at UC to vote at the last minute. And that mantle, they carried the mantle of rent control, I think, in sort of extremist kind of type of politics. And I've heard people say that there's a lot of money carried over from the last the Measure M fight. As far the the money that there was money from the realtor side, that money is all gone. It was gone way back then. And I think the money that, I can't speak for Santa Cruz Together because I wasn't part of the, I don't think they had a lot of money. It was more grassroots.
So was it more of a grassroots
It was a
effort?
grassroots campaign.
How many signatures were collected, to your knowledge, for the recall? 'Cause I think the threshold was about 8,000.
I
I
think there
had
might have
heard
been-
almost twice that much.
Yeah, I don't have the exact number, but I know it was a good margin, probably like maybe
15
11,000.
I heard
or something.
15,000
Okay,
by-
I don't
by
have
then.
that number. 'cause
Okay.
I'm-
And then as far as the actual conduct, because that's the core. So what are your feelings? There were something like 13 different charges leveled against the 2 council members. I believe 2 held. Do you have any firsthand input on those, or other conduct that you've seen perhaps at meetings or outside of meetings?
You know, I think what there is, again, it's getting back to the idea that there's this mandate for these folks to carry the fight forward, and they you know, they're certainly representing a part of the city that I think needs representation. You know, there are homeless folks, there's folks that are struggling with housing. Those folks deserve good representation. However, I think the manner in which it happened, encouraging, there was a lot of city council meetings I went to where there's just people chanting, making noise. I mean, just disrupting the meetings. And I know they feel like they have to do that. I think.
Do you think those interests were encouraged by these council members?
I think they weren't discouraged.
Okay.
'Cause, I mean, I'm not privy to all the behind the scenes thing that happened, but I think there was an atmosphere of just, you know, we're here to take over. And again, polarization, which is what we're seeing on a national level. I think we're seeing it here too. It's a disrespect for the process. That's how I see it.
Okay. And Darius, why are you here?
First of all, Fred pretty much sums up. I'm not going to repeat what he said because
Yeah.
he said everything that I would. I feel as well.
But who do you represent being here at this table right now?
Let me just be clear. I don't represent Santa Cruz United. I don't represent Santa Cruz Together. Full disclosure, I have contributed money to Santa Cruz United, as well as Santa Cruz Together, back during the rent control effort.
Uh-huh.
So I'm basically a concerned citizen. I am also a landlord heavily invested in the city of Santa Cruz with 53 units. So I have an interest in seeing a functioning city council and in addition, a functioning city government. We have a great government here. I've worked with a lot of folks from the landfill guys to director of planning and building and so forth. And there's no deadwood here. These folks are dedicated, they work, and they're committed to the city. And so I read these, of course, everyone's reading these concerns about workplace harassment and so forth.
Do you feel you were harassed just then? No. Okay. That's part of our fearless crew. Thank you for bearing with a low budget effort to get out the truth. Keep going.
And I mean, they are concerning in that it's, you know, so much is online, Facebook, Nextdoor, and so forth about, you know, did he not? Does it rise to the level of, you know, high crimes and misdemeanors for the, you know, relative to Santa Cruz? And you know what? But at the end of the day, it is disrupting the city council work. It's disrupting, and more importantly, the city government work. You know, regardless of what happened, how it happened, to what degree, and so forth. It's not a distraction. It's actually something that's causing dissension and impacting folks' ability to govern and to execute their missions within the city.
Do you have either of you speak? The prior guests had questioned the qualifications of Renee Golder in particular. I think Don Lane, obviously no one's going to question as being a seasoned veteran, but do you want to speak to that? Do you know Renee or of her record at all?
Yeah, I mean, I met Renee and I've, you know, sat and had a chance to talk to her. I mean, what I think she brings to the community is a real big connection. I think she's someone who's really involved.
What's her background?
She's an educator, teacher, and she's been, you know, when I went to
not
her,
exactly a big business interest.
No, not a business interest.
Okay.
I think she, you know, I don't know if her mom is, there's probably a real estate connection in her family, but I think that's not the key of why she's doing it. She's doing it because she cares about the community. And I think what she brings is we don't want professional politicians. I mean, yeah, people, like they're saying, the previous folks are talking about how people need time to learn the ropes. I think she's a smart person. She has a ton of energy, but I think she's also a fair-minded person. I think she cares, and that's one of the problems I see, the compassion there is compassion on the side of the real estate community. There's compassion for all the folks in the city, and I think that sadly gets lost in this when I think there's a polarization like what's happened. And
you manage some buildings downtown that you see. You're right on the front lines as the first response of the compassionate, responsible.
Well, it's awesome to have people, that are representing the disenfranchised, but you also have to, what I see is that people don't always look at the other side of it too, that the business community suffers. So for example, Gateway Plaza, when the Ross Camp was there, I mean, it had a huge effect on all those businesses. And I think the sense I have is they're seeing, the business communities, the landlords are seen as these sort of, moneyed. I heard, bigotry, accusations of bigotry thrown out. None of that stuff to me has any bearing. What it's really about is trying to find a way to reach a consensus. Are these people consensus builders, or are they trying to carry a torch? And I think they're carrying the torch of rent control and, how can we, help the downtrodden? It's got to be a group effort. It's got to be the whole community.
So, but I think, there's the issues on one side, and then there's, the allegations of misconduct, which were the core of this recall. So,
I disagree. Those were the allegations of misconduct came way down the pike. There were three.
So it's been it hasn't been suddenly since Measure M was defeated that
Right.
the allegation, it was before that?
I think the three tipping points, if there were, for the recall were: number one, immediately when the new council, these two, Drew Glover and the council was seated, immediately
Chris Crone had already been there 2 years.
Correct.
Right.
But immediately we have this progressive majority, and they are going and implementing parts of Measure M, which again, like Fred said, had been resoundingly defeated 2-1. And
So what
again,
the voters had said didn't matter. They had their own.
there they are. They have their own agenda. And Measure M.
This sounds like Washington all over again, but just on the different side.
Exactly. And
here
but
we
again,
are.
let's just I don't want to belabor Measure M, but there's some good things in it in terms of tenant protections and so forth. And I'm basically a tenant myself right now, and I do see the need for those. Okay, it is a precarious position to be a tenant in Santa Cruz and not have, not know if you're going to be getting a 60-day notice or whatever the next day. But nonetheless, the most draconian things in there that really killed it were just $20,000 to have to get your house back to move into. Things like that were really the flashpoints and really sank that ballot measure. But enough about that. So to see it coming back again through this progressive council, people are like, wait a minute, we already debated. This has been, we've already been there, done that. It's over. Why are you trying to sneak it in now? That was tipping point number one. Tipping point number two, Ross Camp. How Ross Camp was handled. Now, there's mistakes made by both the city manager, I think, and letting it go on. I mean, it started in November of 2018, and yes, there's things could have been done in our in the city manager's office to abate it early and eliminate the mess that we of course are all familiar with. But then when you have
a 4-3 vote, I think, to keep it going at one point.
But then when you have Drew Glover and Chris Crone both voting to not shut it down was a real that's did it for me. That's where I said, wait a minute, this is not working. And then all of the allegations of misconduct followed. If my calendaring is correct, all of those allegations of misconduct and the Rose Report and so forth followed those two key, flashpoints, if you will.
Yeah.
So to say the recall is all about misconduct and HR and so forth. No, I think that just came out later, and it expanded the particular the group of folks that now are concerned, because maybe those folks weren't so much, weren't dialed into the Ross Camp issue or even rent control. But when now the tent opened further with the allegations of misconduct. Okay. So it's not just one thing, not big money real estate interests, which is complete fallacy. I mean, the number one signature gatherer on the recall campaign is a retired school teacher, and she single-handedly collected 1,000 signatures.
Wow. Does
she know Barry Swenson? Probably not. Does she know DevCon? Probably not. Does she know any developers? No. So there's no, this whole real estate interest and so forth is it's a deflection.
Yeah.
Okay. We could talk about more, maybe Fred could address
So,
that too.
yeah, Fred, any comments in terms of just the character issues or things that you've heard or seen firsthand?
I probably would like both of these people, I mean, on a personal level, but when it comes to politics and where they're coming down, I think, like Darius was saying, I think there's been a lot of positions they've taken which I think are against, if you're looking at the overall community health, they're against the overall community health. They might be helping a small segment like the homeless, but when you have a council member joining a lawsuit against the city to maintain that camp, it to me, that's not in the interest of the city. And having a homeless camp right at the entrance to the city is probably also not in the interest of the city. Yes, we need to be compassionate. Yes, we need to find solutions. But just like housing, I see them regularly voting down housing. I see them not wanting to, again, keeping the torch of Measure M. More recently, there was a vote to have a rental registry where you had to, landlords have, for a large amount of money, have to register all their units, which is an invasion of privacy. And I mean, to me, that's Big Brother. And all to probably moving towards more draconian rent control. Again, and in the meantime, what's lost is this thoughts about, well, how do we create more housing? How do we really solve these problems? Which is a collaborative effort. We need everybody at the table. It's not an easy thing to do, but you can't have them, just going villainizing one side, saying they're bigoted outside money interests. It doesn't work. You have to work, I think, with the status quo.
Fred brings up the issue of housing, of course, housing and homelessness. These are two big hot button issues, of course, in the city. But what troubles me with the progressive majority and these two councilmen in particular is they talk about housing, affordable housing. But what do? They shot down the corridors plan. Years and years of public outreach and study and consultants, literally years, and probably 12, 20 meetings with the public. And they came up with a plan. It was approved at in the last council, I believe, and then now it got shut down. And was enormous amounts of housing to be developed, and many were affordable. Maybe it's not enough, but it will never be enough for Santa Cruz. And then the second thing, and the other one was the Drew Glover voted against the Dream In project. All right. He was I believe he was the lone no vote on that. Again, we need housing. We need housing for everybody, market rate and affordable.
But again, that's political opinion, and regardless of whether a voter agrees or disagrees with political opinion, I mean, as I understand it, this recall it's really about proper conduct and having two confirmed charges held up, and those are around sexism and around bullying. So I think at the end of the day, we as voters or the voting people, I actually don't vote in the city of Santa Cruz, but the voters have to, I think, really apprise themselves of those issues and the background. We have one up for re-election in about 7 months, so I think the focus on that. There are articles out there that everyone can go to. Maybe go to the records. The city council meetings where there was at least a presentation advising for censure. Those kinds of things, personally concern me more. And then on a larger level, for people who do, if the recall is going to be successful, check the candidates' records and or their statements with regard to issues like these that you've very articulately put forward. So, what are your plans, or what's your activity within leading up to obviously the March, the midterm vote, and then leading up to November? How are you each personally going to be active in that?
Well, there's not much time between now and November. Could I say one thing just regarding what you just said?
Absolutely.
Okay, because you're talking about the the recall being because of these allegations of harassment of employees, and to me, those things, I didn't pay attention to that stuff, to be honest with you. It's kind of like when I hear all the stuff in Washington about what the president has done or not done. Right. It's just like I just take it as.
So is it more about just feeling disenfranchised as that they're not representing what you voted for?
No, I see it as, I think that those things might have happened. If so, they would be a natural outcome for, again, this sense of like we are here to change things, and we are the empowered people, and we're gonna, and it's just a general disregard for the process, for the I would say the will of the people. They represent a segment of the population, but in doing so feel like they have the mantle, to essentially be the disruptors and the ride roughshod. And I think that's a consequence of that sort of attitude.
So it is related. It's not unrelated. It
I
is
see
relevant.
I see
your
it as
minds.
that way.
Let me
So,
just
yeah.
add something. First
Sure.
of all, I have met with both Chris Crone and Drew Glover. There's some really good things about both of them. One, they are actually probably the most accessible city council members that I have dealt with. Chris Crone regularly is seen at a number of events that I go to regarding homeless issues, housing issues. He's there in the back. He's in the back row.
So he's a hard worker.
And he's out there. He has boots on the ground. Drew Glover, same thing. He's held agenda review meetings on the Friday before the city council. I've gone there. Yes, it's like I felt like Russell Crowe and Gladiator, surrounded by the usual, noisemakers and so forth. But hey, he invited, he put the invitation out. He has pop-up meetings regarding homelessness issues, on housing issues, and I admire his passion for his causes. I admire his commitment, and I admire his energy.
And I heard the word "but" coming up. So where's the
City
disconnect?
council may not, but given his sharp elbows and so forth, city council may not be the right place for him. There is a place for him in his advocacy. It just isn't on this particular city council, given the way it's gone. Chris Crone, I'm tortured. I'm on the fence because, yes, he tends to represent 180 my politics and so forth. But again, when you look at him as what he does as a council member, he's pretty involved. And if you've gone to city council meetings and watched them like I do for the last the last 6 months, his tone his demeanor has definitely changed. He has apologized. He's offered. He's contrite. He's been,
I believe he
so
went to some
forth.
training. It was prescribed, wasn't it?
That was way back in
Yeah.
following Martine Watkins.
Yeah. Her allegations.
Allegations. So, but as Fred says, they kind of they let this group of activists and so forth representing us, homeless folks, who we're all compatible. Again, we citizens don't hate people because they don't have a house and they're homeless.
Yeah.
We have issues with the behavior associated with that group of individuals, nuisance behaviors, drug addiction, and so forth. And so there's a whole nother discussion there. So, but to just simply represent them when it comes to issues of camping. Now we've got this camping ordinance being revised and coming up in the next meeting. We just had the first round last meeting and so forth, and very controversial. We're back to maybe camps that are in city parks and in neighborhoods that may not be appropriate. And so there's the issues still continue. And they need to look beyond this group of folks. Yes, they're disenfranchised. They've not had a voice in previous, in a lot of other political debates and political ecosystems and so forth. But we don't have district elections. We have citywide elections. So all city council members need to represent all the citizens. They need to read the public correspondence. 250 odd letters against camping in the last week.
Wow.
And
that's received by the city council?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of folks that will write letters, but they won't go to the city council meetings because, they're kind of intimidating. I mean, I go there, you've got Keith McHenry, mumbling, rent strike, all the snapping of the fingers and so forth. I have thick skin, to me it's entertainment, but other folks it's intimidating and they won't show up, but they're willing to write a letter. So those letters and that opinion is just as valid as somebody coming up to the microphone on Tuesday night.
So having been to city council meetings and active in local politics for how many years now? 20?
About 3-4 years.
Three or 4 years.
Yeah, I moved full time. I've been involved in Santa Cruz since '86 when I bought my first rental property. Lived over the hill, worked at tech companies and so forth. Came here full time in 2009.
Did you see a shift in the? They talked. The former Fitzmaurice talked about, well, it's no different. It's always been contentious. People who are complaining about the I guess the alleged mob mentality that surrounds these things now. Was there just as much of that back then? I mean, Fred, when were the first city council meetings you attended?
Probably I've been going to council meetings for about 5 years, but I think things did take a turn after the election, November, again, because of the fact that people felt kind of emboldened and
By the national discourse, I think,
No, well,
as well. I mean,
there's that too. I mean, I think what again for me, I heard the previous speakers talking about how, this, like, there's the city is changing, and it is changing, no doubt about it. I mean, I heard somebody say the other day, they're an older person that has a business downtown. They go, wow, the city, like, they felt the vibe, they call it, the vibe of the city is a lot younger, and it's different. And that is happening, but, and we are unable to stop the money. We've seen UC grow. I mean, you can go back probably the 1960s before UC came. You talk to people, and they'll tell you about how the city changed. And they'll probably lament the fact UC ever was let in. But it's also made it's part of our character, our DNA that's evolving. What I'd like to see the focus on, to answer your other question, is between just moving forward is, can we have constructive discussions about things like, housing, like you mentioned, the corridors plan. Can we build housing in a way that is sustainable? You can't force developers, like, people want to raise the inclusionary housing to 50%. You can't in the real world build stuff and build half of it and make no profit. It just doesn't happen. So there has to be some grounding in reality. But I'm hoping people can work together to actually come up with constructive. UC has to build housing. We've got to find out solutions for transportation. We've got a lot of problems. We need to, and where do you get the money to do this? Because if you don't, like giving away a lot of green passes for $300,000, where do you get the money for this stuff? It has to come from somewhere, and you have to work with people.
comment about the developer comment too. I mean, the developer community, which is very small for Santa Cruz, there might be just less than a handful, okay, that really do the majority of the work. Barry Swenson being the 800-pound gorilla. But developers, they don't surf, they don't drink Verve coffee, and they don't really care about award-winning craft breweries. Their money, their capital is portable. It goes to where the return on investment is. Right. So if it becomes too difficult to build in Santa Cruz and not profitable or too risky, they're going to go to Reno. They'll go to Salinas. They'll go to Monterey. Right. So,
or Watsonville.
But I would actually say some of there are a lot of local developers that actually do care.
Oh yeah, there's Owen Lawler.
And it is so hard to develop. It is so expensive.
Yeah.
Land costs, environmental, impediments. You get sued.
Look at Ocean Street Extension.
Every time you want to develop, you're going to get sued, which is going to add another $300,000 on your. So I'm just saying, there's a lot of local people too, not just the big guys, but there's local people that just
exactly, and I think people need to understand that the developers actually are local.
It's hard to develop.
And you've got Swenson doing the very large, beautiful, I think, really nice projects that are much needed and will really add a lot of value to the town. But this concept of this outside money, it's really a big myth. It really is.
I guess just in closing, we have a couple minutes left. Any thoughts on Fitzmaurice or Catherine Byers in terms of if somebody were to vote for them? Any thoughts on either of them as candidates?
I think they'll carry the mantle of Chris and perhaps Drew, but possibly, they'll the demeanor and the city council meetings and so forth will be more civil, and city government the folks working in the government will feel more comfortable, perhaps, based on the various allegations that we've heard about.
So all agendas aside, you much prefer to see those two come in as opposed to the current two. If
I would like to see some new, folks come in instead of. Sorry, I don't mean a bunch of retreads.
Careful now. We're all getting a little older ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. So,
but Fred, any thoughts on either of those as candidates or as conduct?
I think that I'm personally in favor of bringing in some newer blood. At the same time, I think this is not an issue it's not about racism, which is what I heard the previous speakers. Yeah. But it's about political experience.
Talk about character assassination. I love hearing somebody talk about character assassination right before they.
Yeah. Well, Bill, and one of the guys in Santa Cruz together, you know, during the Measure N campaign, he got his mailbox blown up by a pipe bomb.
Oh, wow.
His wife has just got her Facebook page hacked. I mean, things happen on both sides. We don't want to go there. I think what we want is to build bridges,
Yeah.
and build coalitions, and try to make progress. And what does that look like?
And I think
That's a conversation.
as good a final message as we could probably send out. So thank you for joining us for an installment that I've been honored to guest host. Thank you, Steve Pleich, for inviting me to host your second half here. And we'll see you on the next issue.
All right, so talking.